Now let's get some reaction on the decision in Parliament on that land expropriation. I'm now joined by Dr. Farai Mtero from the Institute for Poverty, Land and Agrarian Studies, also known as Impasse. Thanks very much for joining, Mr. Mtero. As was and other parties objected to that motion to adopt the bill. Just talk us through the EFF and ATM's position of a somewhat watered down version of the expropriation without compensation policy, which clearly informed their decision today.
Thank you. My own sense is that the political parties involved in this process had divergent views from the outset. And if you look at the EFF, it had been advocating for wholesale expropriation, something equivalent to nationalization. The ANC, on the other hand, was pushing for state custodianship of certain categories of land, which is something that we have seen as we speak. There are certain types of land, for instance, in land redistribution, the state does not transfer ownership of land, but remains the custodian, essentially tenants on state land. So they were advocating for a version of ad hoc committee and those kind of differences. And when they sent the bill to Parliament to be finalized, it was not going to pass, given that there was already a stalemate from the outset.
And then to the parties on the other side of the land debate spectrum, if you will, the DA and FF Plus, they are of the view that this would have in fact affected investment if there were to be uncertainty around property rights. We know that the West really does want or hold sacrosanct the ability, the certainty around property rights. What's your view on this argument?
I think the political contestation around the land question, particularly the expropriation debate, created a lot of policy uncertainty and great concern in different sectors of society, but also amongst the investor community, both domestically and internationally. So I think at this point, the most important thing is to focus on the actual important issues on how to transfer land to the landless and the land poor in South Africa outside of this politically contested process, because the constitution, the current constitution without the 18th amendment, allows for comprehensive land reform to be implemented. There are enough sufficient mechanisms and instruments. And I think given that the bill has not been passed, the Parliament has not passed the amendment, this is an opportune time to focus on issues that have been recommended by the Presidential Advisory Panel report, for instance, on the need to accelerate land reform within the confines of the current constitution.
But Mr. Mtero, the ANC, which is the ruling party, still contends that Section 25 does not necessarily allow for this to happen. That's why they were stating that they wanted to make explicit what they deemed was implicit currently, if we look at Section 25. So what is to happen to ordinary citizens now in this land reform project if they hold this view and they are, in fact, the governing party?
I think this was essentially a political process. We all know that with sufficient political will, there is enough scope, there is enough room to implement a radical land reform within the current constitution to broaden access to land, to allow the ordinary people to derive a livelihood from land, to allow poor South Africans to access well-located land in urban areas, which is not too far from economic opportunities. I think the focus should be, for instance, one on the compensation policy, so that to allow land to be expropriated in a less adversarial manner. Besides the compensation policy, there's also the land court bill, which is actually proposing the establishment of a land court which is going to oversee the land reform sector and address or resolve any disputes that arise in the land reform sector. And that land court, the new land court which is being proposed, will be modeled after the Commission for Conciliation, Mediation and Arbitration, the CCMA, so that the disputes, any conflicts that may arise may be resolved in a less adversarial manner and in a more efficient manner. So there's also the issue of land administration. For instance, the land administration systems in South Africa are a bit chaotic at the moment. The state itself cannot administer its own land. So the whole issue of state custodianship is problematic. So with a land administration being adopted as a new arm, a component of land reform, that will ensure that we have a more efficient land administration system. So those are some of the key issues that have been highlighted and emphasized, which need to be attended to.
No, Doctor, unfortunately, we've run out of time. In fact, I wanted to speak to you on the Expropriation Act of 1975, which many have said is quite outdated, speaking on Bantustan's and its purpose. But unfortunately, we have run out of time. Thank you very much. That's Dr. Farai Mtero from the Institute for Poverty, Land and Agrarian Studies, also known as PLUS.